Welcome to Wisła in Poland. We're here at the annual conference of the European Leadership Forum, a coalition of evangelical Christian groups seeking to do what no single organization could do alone, provide a bridge between God's global resources and local leaders from all over Europe. I'm joined by David Robertson, a chaplain at the University of Dundee, Scotland, and minister of St. Peter's Free Church in Dundee, a church that is best known for being the church of Robert Murray McShane, and David is also the director of the Solar Centre for Public Christianity. He is author of Awakening, a contemporary account of McShane's life, and the Dawkins Letters, which resulted in him being invited to debate and discuss all over Europe and elsewhere, UK and elsewhere in Europe. This has been done in cafes, bars, libraries, universities, pubs, restaurants, village halls, and even occasionally in churches. And the topic David is speaking on at this conference, presenting Christianity in the non-Christian media. Welcome, David, to the studio.
Thank you.
And media, you have experience, and we're here to try and tap into that experience. But how should Christians approach the media in general? And then we'll break it down into the different areas.
Yeah, I think a lot of Christians have fear of the media, tend to think a lot of the media are against Christianity, and some are, some aren't. I think people perceive, particularly media like television and so on, as being out with our reach, that people are not interested in us. And I think there's a temptation to try and retreat into Christian media. So we create our own television stations, radio stations, newspapers, and so on. And whilst there's clearly scope and a place for them, my particular interest is in getting Christianity into the mainstream media, which may seem an impossible task, but we have a go anyway.
And we know there are different levels, and you can have what we're talking about, the traditional media, but even that isn't that old, and it's modern as opposed to the print media. But which, when you think of modern media, what are you thinking of?
Oh, I'm thinking of everything. You've basically got what we now call traditional, which is quite funny, really. Television, radio, print media, including magazines, newspapers, and books. And then you've got the digital media, which also, of course, includes television. But you're talking about social media, Facebook, and so on. You're talking about the internet. You're talking about blogging, podcasts, all that kind of stuff. So they intermingle a lot, hugely. And my guess would be that they're going to intermingle even more. But it's across the board.
And so what's the challenge, and what are the challenges for those who want to present, as you do, a biblical faith in the mainstream media? What are you facing?
Well, because of the digital media, it's actually much easier to be atomized. And I mean, anyone can produce a television program. You just need a good HD camera. You can produce it at a certain level. Anyone can write a blog. Anyone with desktop publishing. You know, maybe, I'm not sure what the figure was 30 years ago, but I know when I wrote my own book, that year 180,000 books were published in Britain alone. But that's because of, you know, the ease of being able to print. So I think the big challenge that we face is, how do we get into mainstream media? I guess people would call it secular media, though Lord Reith of the BBC would be quite horrified that that's the phrase that's being used. Or are we doomed to basically having special interest media, so that you've got a country and western channel, and you may have a Star Trek radio program, you know, a knitting internet club or whatever, and you have Christian churches as seen as a specialist interest. Yeah. And my particular interest is getting Christianity into mainstream secular media.
And isn't one of the problems that let's say the traditional presentation of the Bible is not that media friendly, and not necessarily as popular in an entertainment culture as all of the sin that's on offer?
Well, Yes, but part of the problem there is, first of all, forgive me saying this, being in a television, but television's an awful media for communicating a lot of serious things. And I think one of the problems is that too often Christians have taken television and done a kind of head and shoulders
You can
sermon presentation.
Go for it, by the way. Oh, yes, I agree.
You know, that kind of thing. But then the opposite happens. Then you get preachers or churches who try to be as entertaining as possible, and it becomes ludicrous.
Yes.
You know, look at me, I'm driving my Harley Davidson onto the stage of the pulpit, and look how, so it's a bit like in media across the board, the more garish and bizarre something is, the more entertaining it is. So the better television it makes. To do that with Christianity ends up making a mockery of Christianity. So I would argue you have to think of how the media, what the media actually is. So television is very, very visual, and it's great for visual imagery. It's great for different things. But I mean, to me, we've got what we've got. We've got television, we've got print media, we've got lots of different things. And what I want to see is on discussion programs, on the more serious programs in the news, on arts programs, a Christian perspective being put forward by Christians who are good at what they do. I don't want it put forward just because they are Christians. I want Christians to be involved, if you want a biblical perspective, as salt and light in the media. To me, the media is like politics, it's like business. As Tertullian once argued, it's all dirty. It's all a mess. But that's where we're supposed to be. And I think media is modern media is a very powerful means of communication, and we should be in there and using it, and being salt and light.
And you're, among other areas that you're involved with in the media, it's this, having written the Dawkins letters, let's say the genre of public debates, and that does command quite a large audience. You can see it on YouTube, the hits. People want to see conflict and debate. How do you manage that? Because it's an opportunity to get the message across, but also you're dealing with the counter message as well.
Well, there's a danger. I mean, two dogs walking down a street is not going to attract a big audience. Two dogs fighting each other to death, yes, that's going to attract. So there is a danger that you can use debate and discussion to entertain people for all the wrong reasons. My view would be that human beings are physical, they are social, they are spiritual, and they are intellectual. Human beings are rational. And people do actually like to hear discussions. Now, again, it depends on the media how you do it. For example, internet message boards are generally a dreadful place to debate and discuss because you don't get tone, you don't get body language, people get very easily misunderstood. Television debates work okay if you've got time, but if you're talking about I did a debate once that was 10 minutes with 4 people, well, what can you do in that time? And yet that's considered a long time in television, So, but you can still get your point across. An awful lot of what you're doing in the media is stimulating and provoking rather than coming across with a complete set of answers. And maybe that's what we should be doing anyway.
Now, what are the pitfalls?
It depends the media that you're involved in. If you're talking about the internet, one of the big problems is that you hide behind your keyboard. People can be anonymous. It can get very heated. People misunderstand. There's very little human interconnection and so on. So I'm wary. I do a lot of internet discussions and so on, but it can take a huge amount of time. Twitter, for example, I had tweeted something about Richard Dawkins' statement that a pig was of more value than a 6-week-old human fetus. And I was arguing with somebody, someone said he didn't say that, and I said, yes, he did. And then they said, well, even if he did, it's just an egg. And I said, okay, next time you go into a restaurant, ask for scrambled fetus on toast and see what happens. And Ricky Gervais picked up on that and tweeted it, and then tweeted me. And of course, he's got 5 million followers. So suddenly I was getting hundreds of tweets from people who were telling me what an idiot I was, how I should go and hang myself, you know, what was the world doing with people as stupid as me in it, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's a danger, that you can get that kind of thing. In terms of television, one of the dangers is how you come across. You can try not to offend anyone and become so bland that Christianity comes across as dreadfully boring, or you can be incredibly offensive. I was speaking to one television producer who had asked me to take part in a program on alcohol, and I'd agreed, and then she said, by the way, what's your view? And I said, well, I like a malt whiskey, but I think getting drunk is wrong. And she said, really? And I said, yes. She said, oh, I'm sorry, David, you're too reasonable. Yes. We need someone else. Because what they wanted was someone who's an absolute teetotaler who said you're going to hell if you drink alcohol, and somebody else who liked to get sloshed every night. And because both, the two extremes would make better television. Having someone come on and be reasonable, she didn't think it would work. Now, obviously not every program and producer is like that, but there is a danger of being both too bland or being too provocative, and therefore the Christians who get invited onto mainstream media, basically the more extreme you are. I mean, how come everyone's heard of Westboro Baptists, for example? They are a tiny group, a one-family church from the United States who are nuts. And yet, they're probably the most famous Christian group in Britain, which doesn't make any sense.
I can't remember. Is this the one where they burnt the Quran, or is this the one where they lobby,
No, the one
lobby
who burnt
against
the
the
Quran
gays?
is a guy down in Florida, but these are the people who...
Lobby against the gays.
Yes, who stood outside the funerals of American soldiers saying, God hated your son, that's why he killed him. GodHatesFags.com, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's a tiny, tiny group that my own congregation, you could fit them in my own congregation 20 times. Why would we not get asked to comment? Why do they get asked? Because they're nuts. And it just makes better news. And that's one of the things that we have to overcome. We have to overcome it not by being equally nutty in another way, but by providing good copy for me that is both entertaining and intellectually credible, is how I would put it.
How, given that this is largely going to a Christian audience and Christian leadership audience, how aware are you of the spiritual battle?
Oh, phenomenal. I mean, I've done debates mainly on radio because I have a great face for radio, but also on television. And what I've found is that sometimes you come out of these just spiritually completely exhausted. I always ask people to pray for me. I'm aware that I have a sometimes flippant and wicked sense of humor. You could say something that was highly offensive that you didn't necessarily mean to be. You're aware that you can say things that put people off Christianity for life. So, you know, it very much is a spiritual battle. Writing things, you know, because of my internet involvement, I receive hate mail every week, pretty well every day. And whilst it sometimes is like water off a duck's back, sometimes it really gets to you. So you have to be careful. And my motto is, remember, it's not about you, stupid. You know, so you know, I do provoke people, and I should expect to get both good and bad reactions.
And just taking your mainstream TV appearances, do you have a policy that you won't do pre-records because something can be taken out of context? Well,
both television and radio. I mean, pre-records are difficult. I do pre-records, but I would always ask to meet with the producer and talk about, because you trust certain people. So, for example, I've just pre-recorded 4 sermons, actually, for the BBC, and, you know, they're going to edit and so on. The producer I trust, otherwise I could be in trouble. I did something for Kerrang, the heavy metal station, and that was a pre-record, and I actually thought it ended up being a half-hour interview. It was meant to be 5 minutes. And they wanted to cut it back to 20, and I spoke to the producer and said, you know, there was 10 minutes in that where I was pretty awful. And he said, I cut that out, actually, David. So, I mean, I was very grateful he did, because he could have made it very, much more difficult. I I would say with the print media, when you're being interviewed by a newspaper, for me a golden rule is tape recorder. And never say anything off the record. Just tell them this is all on the record, because off the record stuff gets even more twisted. So you don't say anything that you wouldn't want to put in
And
print.
they allow you to have your own independent recording.
Oh yes, yeah. If a journalist wouldn't let you do that, I wouldn't do it, because it would mean you couldn't trust them. I once did an interview. The reason I do that, I once did an interview with a journalist who I said to him, now please do not describe the Free Church in this way. That's a stereotype. That's not what we are. You've seen it. He did exactly what I told him not to do, as though I had said it. So since then, I have, most newspapers are honorable. You know, despite the image, most journalists are honorable in that sense. And if you point out, I'm sorry, but you've misquoted me, it's very handy if you have an actual recording.
Because you cannot retrieve it after something's been aired.
Yeah.
The dynamics of the media world means that they very rarely retract.
Well, and especially now, because of this interface between traditional media and contemporary media, the minute something goes, if I, for example, made a mistake and said something ludicrous, you know, like supposing I said we were having a debate on same-sex marriage, and I jokingly said something like, oh, I think all homosexuals should be hung or something, which, by the way, I don't. You know, but supposing you did something really stupid and made a joke or said something, that could instantly go viral, be quoted all over the place, be cited on, I mean, we live in a wiki Google age where things are always, context means nothing. I mean, it's hugely important for Christians to realize that apart from Google's model of being do no evil, which is quite funny, they also have this policy that they want Google to replace human memory, which is incredibly dangerous. And you will find that, well, I find I'm not kind of A-list celebrity or even B-list, but in terms of Christian terms, there are people who are constantly searching and looking for something that has been said by you. I once wrote an article in which I mentioned a particular politician, how I'd been at their church and really enjoyed meeting them and so on. And 7 years later, she wrote me and said, can you please remove that from your website? I mean, it was archived, never mind on the... I said, why? There was nothing nasty. And she said, yes, but there are a group who are trawling the web for stuff to do with me. Once they see I belong to this church, they're going to accuse me of various things. I will lose my job, which is awful. But you have to be aware that you're saying it in public, so it's going to be in public, and it will remain in public forever.
Now, in Romans, Paul says, how shall they hear except there's a preacher? You come from a great preaching center.
Yeah.
Do you see a role for the traditional preaching that we've understood, you know, in the mold of McShane and Lloyd Jones and others?
I think without preaching, the church will die. There was a survey done of the 10 fastest growing churches in Edinburgh. Every single one of them, whether charismatic, Presbyterian, Baptist, independent, every single one, the number one reason that people gave for going was the teaching, preaching. I think that's still the case. And I think the great thing about preaching is it's the ultimate interactive thing. You are talking, okay, to a whole group of people, but you're interacting with them. It's a spiritual thing. I think that you can use print media, printed sermons, television, radio, podcasts, and so on, to pass on teaching that comes from preaching.
But abstracts as opposed to
well, I would, yes. I mean, for a classic example, we had the wonderful Anglican vicar Dick Lucas preaching for us in Dundee last year. And I asked the guy who does our recording, actually filmed it. We don't normally film sermons because, as I said about the head and shoulders thing. But I asked him to film this, and he did. And I said, let's put it out on the web. And he came back to me 2 days later and said, I hope you don't mind, but I'd rather do this. And he had taken Dick Lucas's 30-minute sermon, turned it into a sermon jam of 5 minutes, complete with graphics, wonderful visuals where he had words coming out of Dick's hand, you know. It was brilliant. We put it on YouTube and it instantly went viral. If we'd put the whole sermon on, I think maybe 1, 2, 3,000 people might have looked at it. I mean, I think there's probably 20, 30, 40,000 people have seen that, maybe a lot more. Now, it's not the sermon, but it's a taster for the sermon. And we put a link to the MP3 and all that kind of stuff. So I think I would encourage Christians, especially in the visual media, to be incredibly creative with things. And I would say that doesn't detract from the word. I think it points to the word. You still need the content. You know, you can have the form without the content. You still need the content, but you need to do your form. It's a bit, print media, for example. I can put out an advert in my local area for a Christianity Explored course. I can just photocopy A4 paper, give the information. Surely that's all people need. I'd be an idiot to do that. I have half a dozen graphic designers in my congregation. Put it out to them. Guys, come up with something. We do coffee shop evangelism. One of my guys came up with this wonderful poster of a cappuccino being poured and a whole sense of graphic imagery. That, for me, is a very creative, constructive use of media. And you're also using people with different gifts, artistic gifts, creative gifts, communicators, speakers, singers. Who is the most important person in any church worship band? The sound guy. They're the most important person by a mile. Get your sound wrong, you're stuffed. You need people with those kind of creative gifts. So across the media, I would say you need your good producers, good interviewers. You know, you need articulate people who can be interviewed. You need, I mean, if your lighting's rubbish, you're stuffed as well. You need great light engineers. You need all of that. Great technicians. So it's a huge thing, but it can be done.
We've ranged across the different sort of genres of the media. Of all of them, which do you think has the most potential for good and ill to be most beneficial or harmful?
Well, I think the internet is probably the greatest invention and challenge since the invention of the printing press. So I don't think I would select any particular one of them. I think I'm not a great fan of television. I love film, and I love going to watch films, and I watch YouTube clips. I kind of watch arty films in the Contemporary Arts Centre and things like that. I love film. I think it's a great medium. But I think television, it's a difficult medium for Christians to do. It's so expensive to do well. Yeah. That's part of the problem. And I'm not convinced that, you know, something like Lord of the Rings does more for Christianity than every Christian television station there is, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm sorry if that offends people.
Mind. No, it's how it is.
You know,
I'm pleased that you've emphasised that the cost of it is phenomenal.
Well, the cost is phenomenal to do it properly. Well. I mean, to do it, it's fair enough. Solas, we do what we call flea bites, which is 5 minutes YouTube clips of me talking about a subject that's come up in the press, whatever. They're intended as discussion starters. They're not intended as full television programs. I mean, my argument would be that decent HD television, well produced, is at least £1,000 a minute, at least. And
I mean, it is changing so rapidly. So even the whole concept of sitting down to watch television is changing, and with smart TVs, you know, it's sort of merging with the internet experience.
Yeah.
So
I think that's going to happen more and more. I mean, the stuff that we do. I mean, I never ever thought I'd watch things on my phone, but I do. I think the key thing is to recognize the limitations of each media. So I do think we need feature-length films. I actually still think we need more books and full-length books. And I'm asking, where's the Dostoevsky of the 21st century? I don't think everything should be in sound bites, but some things should be. But sound bites should point somewhere. And I think you can use media for that. But to me, media is like, it's like my laptop. It is an incredibly brilliant tool and a dreadful master. I find that Facebook is a wonderful tool for connecting people and a dreadful tool for living your life. I find the same with Twitter and so on. You can use them to make contact. We use a mantra in Solace that we call it, we say you've got to contact people, you've got to connect with people, you've got to communicate with people. A lot of the modern media are fairly good for contacting people, reasonable for connecting. Communicating, it takes more. I actually think Christianity is best communicated person to person. You need the community, you need the body language, you need the whole thing. And none of the media can do that. They can offer a bit of that, but none of them can do it in total. So media is a tool that we need to use. We can use it badly, or we can use it well. You can use a knife to kill someone, or you can use it to chop up food, to eat. It's what we do with it. Media, for me, is neutral. I know there are some people who want to argue that particular media, that the medium is the message and so on, and there's an element of truth in that. But providing you recognize what the medium is, for example, you recognize the limitations of television, then you can use it for the right purpose. It's when you start thinking it's something else that you end up, I think, doing harm.
Now, just taking the Dick Lucas five-minute clip, I assume that you had that pointing somewhere, so that you were able to sort of at least link that larger audience.
Yeah, we linked it to the actual sermon.
Great.
But part of it is, C.S. Lewis talks about drippings of grace. And part of what we're trying to do in media all the time is we're dripping away. We're almost nagging in the sense of, I mean, if you saw that clip, there are certain things that I think people would say. First of all, this is graphically very clever. It is done really, really well. Secondly, here is an old man who's, basically a posh English Anglican vicar talking to a bunch of Scots in Dundee, and they loving it. Even that conveys a message. His tone, his way of communicating with people, the fact that he was talking about the Bible and it was so clear and direct, simple yet deep. In that 5 minutes, huge numbers of things were conveyed. And what it would make me do is, first of all, I'd want to pass it on to somebody. And that's what happened. People say, oh, this is really good, you should look at this. And secondly, I would listen to it and think, I'd like to hear the whole of that sermon. And so we put a link to that. And thirdly, I'd say, this Solace CPC, what's that? And so they come onto our website. That's another aspect of the media for the local church. I have found that we've had more people come to church because of the internet and my involvement in the media than anything else apart from friends inviting, which is always the number one reason.
Excellent. We haven't even got onto the local church yet, but thank you very much,
That's no problem.
David. Brilliant.
Is that okay?
Yeah, brilliant. And I just want to say thank you to our audience and also to the organisers of this conference, and to remind you that you can obtain this talk and the answers especially on the focalonline.org website, foclonline.org, using the modern media.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, David.